Welcome back to MaxBlack. Next, we have a very important conversation around healing as a success strategy for Black executive women. And to join us in that conversation is the incredible Anika Applewhite. Anika, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Avis.
Absolutely. Now, I've never thought of healing as a success strategy. It's a very interesting juxtaposition there. Why is healing a success strategy for Black women?
Well, one of the things I think it's so important for us to recognize is that wherever you go, there you are. And so when you think about the things that can derail us in our relationships, in our career, a lot of times it's because we have these patterns that show up and they impact our relationships or our ability to really see our truth.
Oh my goodness. Now, you mentioned this issue of patterns. Where do they come from? Is this part of an intergenerational loop that we find ourselves on?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we find that we wrestle with is that we don't recognize that there are so many things that we're dealing with that are coming from the generations before us. And because in our lineage, we often stop the practice of really talking about the deep work that we've been through, the things that our ancestors experienced, we miss the opportunity to recognize those patterns in ourselves. So for example, someone might have a very high sensitivity to rejection. And perhaps it's not about what they've actually experienced in their lived experience in this lifetime, but it's things that their grandparents and great-grandparents experienced. And so therefore they might have an instantaneous response to something and not know that that's actually where it comes from. And you can imagine that creates a lot of shame for us. It creates a lot of blaming for us because we don't know what the root of it is.
That is really, really powerful. And I would assume then that this not only impacts your life professionally, it impacts your life personally, correct?
Absolutely. Because again, whatever your patterns of behavior are going to show up and present themselves in relationships. And if you've ever had a moment where you stop and think about, like, why did I react or respond in such a strong way to something that maybe seemed relatively innocuous, a lot of times it's coming from that deep trauma work that we have not worked on, that we have not addressed within ourselves.
Wow. So that's really deep. When you are explaining how these past traumas impact how we live our lives today, I think about this just historically speaking. If, for example, you come from a history where families were ripped apart, just as an example, would it not be in that context, if you lived in that context, a self-protective mechanism to sort of mute the bonds so that your heart would not be torn apart as much if your family member was sold away? Are we still then dealing with that type of trauma, even when it relates to building love connections with others, because we're trying to stop being so close in case we find ourselves rejected in the modern way?
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. One of the terminologies that I like to use is creating the ice castle, right? It's this protective bubble where you allow people to come in, but you don't allow them to get too close because you're always trying to protect yourself to ensure that you don't get hurt. It is one of the ways in which we try to create this protective idea of control for us. I will let you in, but only to the space where I feel comfortable that I can protect myself or turn and run away.
Wow. Oh my God, that's so deep. So it almost sounds then self-sabotaging. Like, how can you actually form and exist in healthy, deep relationships if you never let someone get too close to you? If that is the reality, how do you overcome that?
You have to do the healing work. And one of the things that makes the healing work so important is even if we think about the relationships in the workplace, people do have a desire to get to know you. So we think about code switching. I work on this quite a bit as an advisor with my clients, where there is this piece of imposter syndrome, right? Where you're walking into a space and you are presenting yourself as one way, but people can tell that it's not authentically you. And so they're looking for, but like, who's the real Anika? How do I get to know who you truly are? And when there's that kind of dissonance between what the person sees, the way that they see you show up, they lose their trust. And that can be sabotaging when you're looking for the opportunities for promotions or even working in work groups that have the opportunity to help you advance. In your personal relationships, it does the same thing. So you want to build a relationship with someone where you are showing up as yourself fully. And that's at the core of the work that I do.
Wow. So say on the other end of the spectrum, you've done the things, you've gotten the promotion, you've got the car, the house, all the things, and you get to the top of that mountain that you've been striving for years, and you get there and you say, that's it? Like, what happens in those moments then, when you find yourself supposedly getting to the pinnacle of your success, but you're still not satisfied? What could be the problem there?
Yeah, I find that a lot of Black women in general, when we get in that moment, we're looking around and we don't identify the other people around us who are going through the same thing. So the immediate thing is this moment of isolation. Then the other side of it is we tend to carry the successes of others on our shoulders. So we're looking back at the people, the generations that we've been mentoring and who are coming up behind us and wanting to still show up as if we are fully fulfilled because we want them to feel encouraged, but at the same time we're like, but this is not enough. And what I find is that there is this work to do to determine what is your remarkable life. What is the life that will create fulfillment for you? And when you start to do the work to define what it really looks like to live in a remarkable way, it will help you to highlight some of the areas that you need to heal. So for example, a lot of times there are wounds around financial wounds. So we've achieved a high level of success so that financially we have that set of stability and feel like that would then create security for us. But in truth, there's still work to do because that kind of security is momentary. What we're really looking for is to heal the wound, perhaps in a mother or father wound that we had as a child. Perhaps it was that we didn't feel safe in our home environment. So once you have an idea of what it is that you desire in your life, like to live truly fully, you can begin to explore those areas where you need to heal in order to really embrace it.
Wow. So it just sounds like it's always a level of development. Like this journey, it's never a space, typically, I would think, as human beings, where you can say, I've arrived, particularly if you are coming from such a history of trauma. As you're working with your clients, do you find that at some point people feel like, oh my goodness, is there something wrong with me? How do you get them to not feel a sense of there is something defective in them and instead think about how can I just create a better reality for myself given all of the spaces that I've had to navigate to get to where I am today?
It's a great question. I want all Black women to know there is nothing wrong with them. And so in my practice, we start by talking about what are the things beyond you that have impacted you? What are the things in the environment? What are the things that you know about your lineage? And a lot of times what I find is that people don't have a lot of that information in their lineage. So I encourage them to have those conversations where they're able to. The other part is connecting people to their divinity within helps them to reveal a ton of their truth to themselves. And so when they do that spiritually grounded work, that connecting to themselves intuitively, then they're able to really recognize, I have what I need. I am more than enough, and to really deeply believe it. It's interesting that we live in a time where people like to tell us who we are and what we're capable of, right? And we often listen to the lie instead of finding the truth within ourselves. When you explore that truth and you know who you are, then you become unshakable, even in times of mass chaos like what we're in today.
So my last question is going to be around that. I would think right now is probably one of the most challenging times for Black women to navigate. The grief of what we've just experienced in terms of the election, but also maybe even more hostile environments in their professional workplaces, perhaps. How do we deal with this and not lose ourselves in the process?
There's a couple of things that I would suggest. One is you have to have a network. You need your safe places. And in order to really have a safe place, you have to create some vulnerability so that you can connect and allow yourself to be seen. We need time alone. That at that time to do the introspective work, to be reminded of who you are. And sometimes journaling can create the space or energy, meditation, prayer. Those are all great ways. And then the last thing is to invest in yourself by doing your healing work. Because the more grounded you are in your truth, the more that you are able to navigate through whatever the environment is without allowing yourself to be moved by it.
I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for sharing today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thanks for joining us here on MaxBlack.